Hi, I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council, and you may have heard I am also running for Collin County Republican Party Chair. So first things first tonight, this is my last City Council recap before Texas Independence Day, which is this Saturday, March 2nd. So happy Texas Independence Day. Second, our last council meeting will be in the council chambers will be next month. So starting April 8th, on which there is also a total solar eclipse, by the way, we are going to start having our council meetings at Davis Library while the council chamber at City Hall is undergoing renovation. Instead of the more circular dais, we're actually going to expand it and open it more to be more open toward the council chamber, move it back a little bit, and then we're actually going to create a pit in front of the dais so that when folks like Alex Stein and Alex is kind of funny, but the second guy who came on tonight was really not funny. So if he fails to provide amusement, then we can open up that pit, and then he goes down like in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi, and he has to fight the Rancor, and the Rancor just tears him to pieces because he's not Luke Skywalker, you know, so it just tears him to shreds. So beware, all of you undercard acts, before you come speak in comments of public interest after the renovations are done. But moving on. So tonight we talked about a few things. We had a couple of zoning requests. We have a new drone ordinance. I'll talk about that at a little bit of length. And we had a couple of updates to bring us into alignment with state law. So first, we also had a short-term rental study implementation timeline update. So the short-term rental task force is going to have its final meeting this Wednesday, which is, as you see this, tomorrow, most likely, because this gets published in the morning. I'm recording this after the council meeting tonight. So recommendations are expected to include a registration ordinance. A registration ordinance doesn't mean anybody can just register and have a short-term rental anywhere they want, but it does provide a mechanism for enforcement where short-term rentals may be permitted. So on March 19th, we expect the final short-term rental task force to be presented to City Council. And on April 1st, we expect that the registration ordinance for the zoning piece of it to go to planning and zoning. The separate piece, the registration, there's the zoning and the registration, two components. The council will have to take up the zoning matter we're anticipating doing that on April 22nd. That is after planning and zoning reviews it on April 1st. And then, of course, we also have to consider the registration ordinance. So that is all coming up. To recap those dates real quick, March 19th, which is our last city council meeting at City Hall before we start having council meetings at Davis Library. We are going to hear the final report from the short-term rental task force. April 1st, the zoning component of the short-term rental recommendation should be going to planning and zoning. And on April 22nd, all of it should be coming before council. We also heard a case about the heritage preservation grants. So we do provide tax money to help preserve our heritage properties. Now, there are several things that have to be checked to qualify as a heritage property. It can't just be old. But we provide some tax credits to offset, credits isn't the right word, we provide some grants as well as tax credits to offset the cost of maintaining heritage properties. Because with most of our homes, it's a simple matter of repairing stuff. You either put on a new roof, repair the fence, paint the door, whatever. But for a heritage property, it has to be maintained according to certain standards. So that takes more expense to maintain it. But we want to preserve our historic districts in the city, which also brings in some amount of tourism and interest. And so the proposal was made tonight by Councilman Riccadelli to use our hotel occupancy taxes, which total $14 million this year, in order to offset the property tax credits that the heritage properties are getting. So it was also mentioned that the heritage grants have not really seen an increase since 08-09 when they were implemented. And Councilman Riccadelli pointed out that in that time, inflation has risen 47%. So a substantial climb in inflation which includes the cost of maintaining heritage properties, but we have not seen a commensurate increase in the amount of the heritage grant. So we're going to dip into the hotel occupancy tax for that as well. We did address that as well in one of the consent agenda items. And then we moved on to a discussion about a zoning request. I will tell you in advance, this did not completely conform to the new comprehensive plan, but I did support it and it passed unanimously. And here's why. This was for 25 single-family attached homes in a little oddly shaped parcel of land northwest of Park Boulevard and Enterprise Drive. These are for sale, not rent, for sale luxury townhomes, 3 stories with a rooftop deck, 25 units. Now, the reason it did not conform to the comprehensive plan was because the buildings were 10 feet taller, a story taller than recommended by the comprehensive plan. It fit the land use designation in the comprehensive plan, just the building height was out of conformance. The land use and the housing mix were consistent with the comprehensive plan. Plus, I've been harping on this for a long time. We need smaller footprint ownership options. Now, these are, I didn't say affordable options necessarily, though we do need those, but we also need to diversify our housing mix. So as luxury townhomes, these are not quote unquote affordable housing that is affordable, but they are going to help with our housing mix. So hypothetically, somebody who bought their 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 square foot home 30 years ago, and they don't need all that space anymore. They don't want all that space anymore. They're an empty nester, but they don't want to rent an apartment and they don't want to move into a 60-year-old home. Maybe they can afford to move into these swanky new single-family attached luxury townhomes. Without the option of those townhomes, many of those empty nesters, they don't want to leave Plano, so they're just staying there. They're not selling that 3,000 to 4,000 square foot home to make room for the next growing family, because there's nowhere for them to move to if they don't want to rent or move into a 60-year-old smaller footprint home. So even though these are on the pricier side, these will help diversify our housing stock, because we have, as if you've been listening to me for any length of time, you know that I keep harping on, we have a dichotomy of housing, large single-family homes and apartments. And for the most part, that's it. So this is a good thing, I think, and that's why it passed unanimously, 8-0. We then heard the case for a specific use permit, an SUP, for an electrical substation for data centers. That passed 8-0 as well. So data centers, of course, use a lot of power, hence the need for an electrical substation for them. Then we got to our drone ordinance. So I'm a little conflicted about this. This has been punted a couple of times, and the ordinance came before us tonight for consideration, and personally I was struggling to see why we needed an ordinance. A request from one of the drone, now let me clarify what this ordinance was before I go any further. The city cannot regulate flight paths, operations, anything related to the drone once it's in the air. The FAA governs flight paths, and the state governs operational aspects of drones. So all this ordinance was to do, the only thing the city really can do, is govern the staging area for drone deliveries, just the staging area. So that said, that's why I had a hard time understanding why we even needed this ordinance. It was touted last year when it was first brought before us that it would be the first of its kind in Texas. I'm like, okay, then what's the urgency? It hinges on 3 things. One is noise, okay? Second is open storage and the requirements around that, and where you can have open storage. And the third is screening, particularly as it pertains to open storage. So we already have ordinances governing all of that: noise, open storage, screening. And a request was sent in by one of the folks with the drone organizations. There were several represented, after council meeting had started, sent it at 5:18, asking that it be remanded back to planning and zoning. Now, that specific email wanted us to waive requirements for screening completely for open container storage containers and drone delivery sites. Now, there was a motion made to go ahead and there were other requests apparently that were made. They wanted it to go back to planning and zoning, work with the planning staff to make sure it was right. It was remanded, the motion was made to remand it back to planning and zoning. That motion failed, 3-5. So then the conversation had taken place on the dais this whole time. The alternative conversation was we should pass it now so that we have something in place. And it was during this discussion that I asked, why do we need this at all? And Planning Director Christina Day, she presented what I thought was a legit convincing argument that the restrictions under which drone delivery services operate now are fairly onerous because all of our ordinances, noise, screening, etc., were written potentially decades ago before a drone delivery service was ever even conceived. So several of the things they had to do now just to operate something like a drone delivery service required more hoops to jump through than maybe a standard freight operation because everybody was used to that when we wrote our ordinances. That seemed to make sense to me. So the motion to remand failed. And then the motion was made to pass the ordinance as presented with a requirement that we revisit it in 12 months because this is a rapidly evolving industry sector. And I went ahead and I voted yes for that because I felt that the explanation I got was sufficient to merit it. It still left some questions like the disparity of why should drone delivery operators get special consideration for their open storage requirements, because the ordinance only created a distinction for to waive certain open storage requirements or modify them for drone delivery operations, but not anybody else. And I had a problem with that, as did the two planning and zoning commissioners who voted against this when it came through. I went ahead and I voted for it, and the vote was the opposite of the vote to remand it back to P&Z. The same three council members who had voted to remand it voted against passing it. So it passed 5-3. Had I voted no, it would have failed, and it wouldn't have moved forward. It wouldn't have been remanded to P&Z. It wouldn't have moved forward. Maybe we would have had some additional debate and tinkering at that point, or just left it alone and say, okay, let's wait for this rapidly evolving sector to catch up. So very quickly afterwards, I realized I regretted my vote because I could have been the deciding vote to go ahead and fail it. And that wasn't based on, my regret wasn't based on the answer I'd gotten, because the answer I'd gotten from the planning director made sense. It was based on knowing how the count went, that, if it had passed 7-2, then I could have voted no and it still would have passed. But knowing I could have been that one vote, that's made me regret it and made me think that, I could have gone ahead and voiced all of my misgivings right then in the form of a no vote and made it go back through the process to give us something that made complete sense, at least to me. And Councilman Horn brought up an excellent point that part of the challenge hinged on what we permit as screening. It's either masonry or a living screen, like hedges, trees, etc. We don't really allow for the concept of temporary screening. So that's something that I backed him up on, saying, yes, we should bring that back to look at temporary alternatives. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you that I had almost instantaneous regret over that vote. And I thought it was interesting in retrospect that the regret centered more on the fact that I could have forced it to go back through the process than about the fact that I agreed with the rationale for having something to make it easier for drone operators to operate. So total candor and transparency, I regret that one, but no takebacks, unfortunately. Then we moved on to a couple of changes to our zoning ordinance as well as to our subdivision ordinance. These are wrought by updates to state statute last legislative session. So a lot related to Senate Bill 929, we have to update our zoning ordinance to align to state law for non-conforming uses. Regarding House Bill 1750 and House Bill 2308, these were for basically prohibiting a city from prohibiting most usual types of agricultural. And HB House Bill 2439, the materials bill for construction materials. I think I got the laugh line of the night when, after all the remand debate for the drone ordinance, I made a motion to remand this back to the state legislature. You had to have been there. Trust me, it was funny. And then finally, we updated the subdivision ordinance to align to House Bill 3699, which is related to platting. That's basically how you, when you're developing something, you chop up a parcel of land and say what you're going to put where you're going to put the buildings, the streets, etc. So it's just streamline that process. So with all of that, you have now been caught up on tonight's City Council meeting. Again, happy Texas Independence Day. By the way, early voting is going through this Friday. Polls close at 7 p.m. Then there is a 3-day voting hiatus in these primary elections. And then Election Day itself is next Tuesday, March 5th. Polls are open from 7 to 7. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. God bless.